And we are live. And I'm Douglas Ferguson, and I'm here with Karen Holst.
Hello.
And we are co authors of the book Start Within. And we've been hosting these weekly sessions where we invite a doer, as we like to refer to them, people who like to get their hands dirty, who are passionate about getting things done and have successfully navigated the complexities of large organizations to get things done. And today we have Adam Schwem, who is a senior software engineering manager at Vrbo and a good old friend who I've always been amazed by. And so it's going to be a pleasure chatting today. Welcome, Adam.
Hey, thank you very much. Thanks for having me, guys.
For sure. Thanks for being here. And so I just want to kick things off, Adam. Like when I first mentioned Start Within for you and just the concepts of navigating large companies and, and you have the perspective of being a leader and not only navigating from the standpoint of your own goals and dreams, but also helping those that you are developing, helping them with the work they're doing. Like what kind of jumped out to you as far as like that crazy world and dealing with these issues?
I think one of the hardest parts for I think all of us to really come to grips with about navigating is a leadership role in a large company is the same thing as being a leader at a small company and looking at the whole world. It's just a different kind of social network, but you don't really get to kind of say what's going to be going and have any kind of authoritative way of driving things forward. You have to be good at taking ambiguity and influencing the ambiguity in order to make other people successful with their ideas. Even if it's like your idea that you really think is valuable to be putting forward, you have to empathize with other people and figure out how is your idea related to their perspective.
It's interesting that you bring up ambiguity within the context of a large organization, because often when we talk to startups, we're coaching or people that are, especially recent grads, that are like, I'm thinking about going to a startup. Then my number one question is, how well do you handle ambiguity? Because
Right.
it's the number one skill for anyone working on a startup, no matter what position you're in. And so we often think of big companies as having it figured out and having lots of rigid set structure and rules. But the fact of the matter is, maybe that's a reason why new ideas are so difficult, because you've got all the structure to maneuver, yet you're talking about something ambiguous and you're talking about something that is somewhat unknowable because it's new. I don't know. Does that resonate? Does that
Yeah.
seem?
Yeah. I mean, like if you take a look at just when you think about ideas at scale, right? It's the same problem. So let's say I was CTO of a company of 30,000 people, right? I don't have time to explain to everybody exactly what their job should be. So I have to find some way to provide clarity in a way that's going to make what I want to have happen, right? Maybe I'll dive in and try to unblock some things here and there, but ultimately they have to kind of set the vision so that people can take what they're trying to drive and then make it their own. And so we have that at large organizations too, where sometimes it seems almost tone deaf because the people at the top are just not telling us clearly what they want to have done. But they're actually doing it on purpose, in my opinion. They're trying to let those ideas percolate down because they don't actually care about the implementation details. They just want to make sure that the right value or the right focus is being set by other leaders in their company. It's just a different thing to manage leaders than it is to manage like a direct IC or somebody who's on the line.
Yeah, that's interesting. This whole notion of specificity and how that can really unlock autonomy and empower people to kind of, like, you've got a big idea, but it's going to take a lot of little ideas to make that
Right, right.
come to fruition.
Yeah.
And so if you just kind of plant the seed for the big idea and let the little ideas percolate, that can really empower people to, it's almost like fractaling, right? Like we've got like
Totally.
someone starting
Yeah, yeah.
within, but then we got all these people going, oh, well, now that inspires me to go do the thing that I think is exciting to do within that context, within that lane that I can swim in.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that something that my father told me, he ran a telecommunications company to success. I asked him as a young kid, I said, what is it that CEOs do? And his response has just haunted me ever since was he said, CEOs' jobs are to prevent bad ideas from getting traction. And I love that because this really is what you see in like really good leaders is they really let other people be themselves with their ideas, and they really just try to make sure that when there's a bad idea, that it doesn't start to get life in that organization, right? They stop that in its tracks.
Yeah, that's a good point because the more it grows, the more just the harder it is to carve it out, right? And then to
Right, right.
reverse it all, because communication is so difficult, and if it's found its ways through the organization, unraveling that can be quite an ordeal. And I think there's a slippery slope there, right? Because you want to give people latitude enough to fail and learn their own lessons,
Oh,
but you
right.
don't want it to like metastasize and like be something that you have to just go wrangle in and whatnot.
Yeah,
It's like,
keeping bad ideas, but also how you can be the conduit for the good ideas and not get in the way of it. And big companies do struggle with that, and look for leaders within the organization to help make sure that those come to the top. And that goes back to a really interesting point you made early on with the leading without authority. I think people that are don't have a title of innovation or aren't given the mandate to go do this kind of work can get hung up on needing permission. Someone saying,
Mm.
tapping them and saying, you're allowed to go do this. And letting that go, the next part of it is that they're not this rogue cowboy. Now they've gotten the itch and you're excited to do it, that you're also not doing this alone. And I would just love to hear about your experience and seeing examples of where that flourished or maybe where it failed.
sure. Yeah, I don't. It's a good setup. I'm trying to think. Like, I was actually just in a philosophical kind of conversation with myself over a. It doesn't even actually matter the idea, but there was a big idea that got pushed through the company that we're seeing a lot of people adopting, and it's really exciting. It really has to do with using a different methodology for discovering the customer journey and getting all teams on board to how they describe how our products work. And I hope my boss isn't actually watching this, but I wondered, was he managing me or was I managing him? Because we had the same idea, right? And my entire vision for what was going on was to make him as successful as possible with that idea. And so I was not a credit taker, but it was this kind of inverse relationship. Like, is this his idea that he's managing me to help make a reality, or is it my idea and I'm helping him like make sure that he's doing it? Like, at a certain point in time, like you don't have ownership of really where you want things to go if you want to be successful. And it's just kind of weird to think of things that way, where it's like, yeah, there isn't really like one person who can be the official shepherd for like big ideas.
Man, that's awesome. It makes me think of like these layers of consciousness, and like when you can mature in your own self identity and your own confidence to the point where like you don't have to take credit for things, that you can still have this get personal value out of seeing them come to life. That's really phenomenal. And then so congratulations to you for being there. And then also. I think what you're talking about really relates very closely to a portion of the book where we talk about like working with your manager and even give people some tools on how to have some of those conversations. Because one pitfall we see often is people, and you've matured way beyond this, but like in the early days, I'm sure you can relate. You probably were there at some point. I know I was in my career at some point. I had some idea and I just ran into the office and I'm just like beaming with energy and I rattle off all why it's all awesome, and my
We got to
manager's
do
just
this. We got to do
sitting there
this.
like tapping their foot, waiting for me to finish, and then they just like tell me the five fatal flaws that it has, and then I walk out dejected, and like if you and so getting our advice to that was like to plan that conversation more carefully, because if you go in and you've already set it off, you not maybe not haven't ruined everything, but you definitely set it off on a strange trajectory. So anyway, it's interesting to hear you talk about the total opposite end of that, where you're starting to self-realize that like, whoa, we're kind of like becoming this like unit that's like kind of influencing each other in this kind of amorphous way. That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. So that excitement like issue that you just brought up, I don't think I've moved past it, but I think I have, because also it's an exciting thing as a human to broadcast to another human. I have a great idea and I think that you should hear it, right? Like it's a human thing to do. What I have learned, I think, is that The forum for that is to do that multiple times, more one-on-one with people to socialize an idea, rather than doing it during a meeting where like you have everybody's attention. Because what you're kind of saying when you're like in a meeting with like 8 people listening to you is you're saying, you're kind of like not able to say, hey, my idea is better than your ideas. Like that's what you're kind of accidentally communicating. Whereas like if you're doing it one-on-one, then it becomes a back and forth, and you can kind of, okay, here's what I think, what do you think? And then they can add on to it, and you can reinforce what you like about your original idea with that person's new version of it. You can get adding on to it, right? Like that's probably the better way to bring that excitement around to socialize. It's not good when you're kind of sage on the stage, because you really are communicating something you're not meaning to accidentally.
Yeah, or at least go ahead, Karen.
Well, I just love that idea, and I think going into that, your people don't like the politics of selling an idea, and I don't want to go to the meeting before the meeting. I just want to go and have it be real and authentic. And how you frame that is actually real and authentic, and still makes it exciting. Is that you're learning individually, and then you can go back to the group and start to talk about it in a group setting, and it might change the diversity of the ideas or how it fluctuates. But I love that idea of socializing beforehand. It's not just about politics, but it's about like the human part of being excited about something together with someone else.
Yeah. I mean, to me, the way that you know whether or not you were successful in that type of influence is when you hear from somebody that you didn't know, like at all, your idea. Like then you're like, oh man, okay, so my idea's gotten out there, and now I don't even know how you got, like, it definitely like jumped ship somewhere, and like now it's coming from you. And that's always like a beautiful thing to see as a leader, where you're like, cool, okay, that was a good thought, and it's gotten even better, and I'm hearing it now from some other part of the org.
That's incredible. Do you generally think about, like, how do you decide who you want to, like, who's safe to share with early, and then how frequently? Like, is it more organic, where you just bump into someone and you're like, I'm just going to tell them, or do you kind of premeditate it, or what's the approach?
I don't know. I think that's just down to like personal styles and like
Sure.
your personality, right? Like I'm pretty blunt and transparent about what I think and what I feel, and I hope it comes across mostly charming to people, where they don't feel personally attacked about my thoughts. But some people aren't like that. Like some people really like to ideate beforehand, and they don't want to come across in a certain way, and might need to be more specific about it. So I think it just goes like, whatever it is, it's got to be authentic. It's got to be you, right? Because if we're not being authentic, then all these other red flags come up about communication, where people are like, are you manipulating me? Are you playing politics? Are you all those other dots? And that means that like someone's, again, they have filters and walls up about what you're trying to say and what you're trying to communicate.
Yeah, that's so important, that this notion of being authentic, and not only being authentic, but I mean, because it could be authentic for some people to be manipulative and spiteful and things. And so
totally.
are we putting everyone's best interest ahead of things? And then also, are we focused on shared values?
That's right. The shared values thing is like, you know how there's all those like different like leadership games where you try to unpack like how to be better leaders, and sometimes you play very silly games. One that was really successful that my previous boss shared with me was this kind of like shared value solitaire, where you discovered through different cards, like, are you more of somebody who values merit or autonomy or power? And the useful part of it wasn't really to learn like about yourself. Like it's like you kind of like, oh, well, that makes sense. That's kind of who I am. It was like the reflection of knowing that other people might value something differently, and you need to adjust your communication to match their value system. If I think that something is cool because it's like really, really good, and I'm talking to someone who really only cares about job security, like I need to change my communication to reflect that their value system and my idea have something simpatico. And like as you were saying about certain people, some people value power, and like that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that, but you should know when you're talking to them, or if that's the kind of thing you value, so that you can adjust your communication to people who really don't like that stuff at all.
Yeah, and and sometimes it, like, people go in with the entire like smorgasbord of like benefits and values, and you'd be much better off if you just like winnow it down into like, well, here are the things they care about. Like, let's just talk about those things so they don't get distracted by the stuff they don't care about, or miss out on the important piece, because that's the thing that's going to get them listening. So yeah,
that's an interesting thing about how people pitch ideas in general, is like it's so much more valuable to do a weak pitch and know that you have the answer to the question. Like, it's almost like a Gestalt theory sort of thing, where it's like, the Gestalt theory with like where you draw the circle but you miss a quarter of it, but your brain fills it in. It's kind of like, it's so much more effective to, instead of covering all your bases, have all your bases covered and leave obvious gaps so that when people are engaging with you, you can fill them in, being like, oh yeah, I know that. But it's entirely like inappropriate to pre-anticipate that everybody needs to hear all of the context and how well you've thought it through up front. It's just kind of like eyes glaze over, and I don't know.
Yeah, it reminds me of in the workshops we run, we design them based off that same concept. And if we do a little micro lecture before the activity, we leave out a ton of things. And often if there's some myth or there's some big gotcha, we'll totally leave that out, because we want the participant to experience that. And then afterwards, we teach. Then there's that micro teaching moment of like, see what just happened? That's what we don't want to happen when you're out there doing this work. And so you're right, leaving things out intentionally so that people can have that personal experience, and then you connect with them on that and help them through it. It's very, very powerful.
Yeah. And I think it just boils down to like the human element of it, right? Like we need to understand that when we're trying to influence another person with an idea, like we need to let that person also be a human and take success and to be excited about what they're contributing to it, even if it's something that you're trying to influence,
That's a beautiful sentiment to end on. We're a little bit over time, so I'm going to end it there. Adam, it's been a pleasure chatting with you as always. And Karen, any final thoughts from you?
Well, you can find the book on Amazon for sure. And we do this every week. So if you have, thank you. If you have any ideas you want to share, or you want to hit us up with topics that we should be covering, just reach out to us via LinkedIn.
Excellent. Well, again, thanks,
Karen.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.